Here are 9 cool watercolor tricks you should know. When painting a solid wash, submerge your whole brush into the paint and paint onto the paper directly. Try to cover the area with the least amount of strokes possible. This will create a nice and smooth solid wash. When creating a dark to light gradient, cover only the darker area with paint, and with water, paint the lighter half of the gradient, starting from the area with the paint downwards. To create a gradient with 2 colors, use the same technique, but instead of water, use a different color instead. To create a wet on wet effect, place water down on areas you want paint on, and with a brush full of paint, dab it onto the water while it's still wet. This technique is useful for creating things like galaxies or painting backgrounds. For the wet on dry technique, lay a solid wash down and wait for it to dry fully before painting on top. This is called layering and is useful for creating certain details. To create thin lines, use the tip of the brush and press very lightly while dragging the brush across the paper. And to create a thicker line with the same brush, press the brush a bit harder on its side while dragging it across the paper. For the dry brush effect, dry your brush on a cloth a little before painting on the paper. Hard versus soft edges. To create a soft edge, use water to spread the paint around the edges. This technique is similar to creating a gradient with water. Lifting is a technique we can use to lift pigment off the paper. While the paint is still wet, use a tissue to dab away some of the areas. This is good for creating textures like clouds. Lifting is also used when we make a mistake. Although we cannot erase watercolor completely, we can use a bit of water to wet the mistake and a tissue to clean it up. This can be repeated to lift the watercolor up the paper. We can create a splatter effect by using a brush with paint and hitting it against another brush to get splatters on the paper. This is good for creating things like texture or just to fill up areas around the paper. And those were 9 cool watercolor tricks you can use in your watercolor paintings.